So I want to give the audience that are listening some practical ways that they can change their life to live a better life and to navigate the food environment we live in. But just generally the advice that you would give if you had the ear of, I don't know, 5 million people right now, and you could say something to them to help them live better lives, to perform better, what advice would you give them?
Number one is I would say, be conscious of the food you're consuming and what you're consuming on a daily basis. The impact of food is equivalent to medicine. It is, and sometimes more powerful than medicine. So what you drink, what you eat, focusing on whole foods, not consuming liquid calories. And if you're someone who could benefit uniquely from stable glucose levels, lower insulin levels, like someone who has some type of metabolic disorder like I do, reducing carbohydrates oftentimes can be a very powerful strategy. In fact, known to prevent and reverse things like obesity and type 2 diabetes, with emergent evidence for its potential ability to put things like serious mental illness into remission. But we'll see as more evidence comes out. Exercise on a regular basis. We know that exercise might not be the lack of exercise might not be the primary driver for why someone is or isn't obese, but we do know that physical activity promotes health. We do know that physical activity is extremely important for overall well-being. And so
you've got big muscles.
Oh, well.
Is that somewhat linked to your type 1 diabetes at all? Is that part of your strategy?
Look, I was obese at one point, and so I've since that point taken I become obsessed with trying to find out how to be bigger, stronger, faster, optimize my metabolic health, optimize my performance. And so it's been a lifelong kind of self-experiment in that journey. But exercise is just important in general. But for me, it's about all the different experiments and strategies I can use with exercise, with resistance exercise and beyond, to kind of play around with what affects my body, what affects my insulin, how do I increase my overall metabolic health. And what I have seen is that that's directly linked to my performance.
How often do you exercise?
I try to exercise every single day, as much as I.
How long for, and what types of exercise?
So what I do right now is I typically do weightlifting for 30 minutes to an hour or 6 days a week. And then I will go typically ride a bike to jiu-jitsu, so Brazilian jiu-jitsu, which can be uniquely almost like a mixed exercise, intense exercise, where it's going to be extremely intense for like 5 minutes, and then you have a 1 or 2 minute break, extremely intense, and then a break. And I do that typically around 5 days a week. I also try to purposely engage in some type of aerobic exercise when I can. If I wasn't able to do as much jiu-jitsu one day or as much resistance exercise, I always try to add on some type of cardiovascular work, whether that be a run, a bike, or these Airdyne bikes where it's just lower and upper body. I find those to be incredibly effective and powerful tools, and actually just not causing damage to muscle tissue, but also allowing you to improve your overall cardiovascular health.
What does your diet look like?
So I tend to wake up and not think about food. That's one thing that I've also experienced, similar to you, that when I switched to a ketogenic diet, not only improved my glucose and insulin, but I also found that with a ketogenic diet that I don't feel hungry. So I would wake up and I don't tend to eat food right away. In fact, I enjoy when I don't eat food more so than when I do eat food oftentimes, not because I don't enjoy the feeling of sitting down and having food. I love that. But the experience and lived quality of life of not having high variable glucose levels, high insulin levels, and the uncertainty that comes with that in my daily life, I enjoy the 23 hours or 22 hours of my day where I have this stability, not the moments in time where I'm introducing uncertainty and variability. To dumb that down a little bit, what I'm saying is that when I wake up and I don't eat food because I find that I'm not hungry, but I also find that it makes managing diabetes easier.
And so do you eat once a day or twice a day? Or
I tend to eat 2 to 3 times a day, sometimes right before jiu-jitsu or weightlifting jiu-jitsu, always afterwards, and always sometime before bed. Try not to do it right before bed because it tends to impact my sleep quality a little bit. But I find that I just eat whenever I feel hungry, and I try to give myself sufficient protein to be able to respond to the exercise that I'm doing.
So I've got the first one's about being intentional about your food choices. The second one is about exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else?
Well, sleep's really important. These are Stephen, this isn't like oh, like this is the most revolutionary advice of all time. But these core foundational components, good nutrition, tailored to your specific needs, exercising as much as you can, and getting good sleep are the pillars of health. If you don't have those corrected, then you're wasting your time everywhere else.
And is there anything as it relates to glucose that surprised you? Because you're someone that sees a lot of this data. I mean, you walk around with the two devices on that you've mentioned, and you're looking at the insulin and glucose response. Is there anything that people don't understand as having a really pronounced impact on their glucose levels that they wouldn't expect? Like orange juice is one of the ones that growing up I thought this was a healthy thing. I used to drink Sunny Delight thinking I was putting all these amazing vitamins in my body. Yeah. And now I actually look back and regret it. And not to be judgmental over any parents, because parenting is very hard, but sometimes I'll see parents giving their children like a big glass of orange juice. And in my head, I just see the glucose spike that child's about to have.
It's funny when you mention parenting, because I have a 3 and a 6-year-old at home. And it's amazing when they try one of these foods, these very sugary foods, these very tasty foods, it's almost like they become incessant on wanting it again. Like normal food isn't good enough anymore. And I think that's a great illustration of what many of us adults are challenged with on a daily basis. But yet many people are just unaware of the impact that it's having on their metabolism, impact that it's having on their hunger, the impact that that's going to lead to on their future health.
And is there anything that you've spotted from your experiments with your CGM and your insulin device that people should most certainly avoid? So you said liquid calories. Is there anything else that causes a really pronounced or unexpected glucose response?
Yeah. There's so many, honestly, Stephen, over time that it's really hard to pinpoint any singular one. A lot of the foods that are out there are often surprisingly challenging on glucose levels, on insulin levels, particularly the processed foods, because what happens when you make these food products is that you're trusting the food company to put ingredients in it that you're going to respond favorably to, that your metabolism will respond well to. And the truth is that that's far from a guarantee, and in many cases maybe less likely than it is likely. And so, I don't have a singular example for you, Stephen. But I've experienced it numerous times.
So I've got a small list here. Sugary drinks, white bread and bagels, white rice. That surprised me a lot because I used to think white rice.
Oh, really?
I thought growing up rice was like a health food.
Okay, well, so on that note, white rice, potatoes,
all
pasta.
Potatoes in any form.
Sweet potatoes tend to have less of a glycemic response, but it's still going to have a potent glycemic response.
So mashed or baked potatoes, obviously French fries, yeah.
For sure, French fries. Most of pasta is a big one.
Cereal? Refined cereals?
Most cereals are actually worse than the foods I just described on blood sugar and insulin. By a long shot. In fact, most of these heart-healthy cereals, these I would never, blood sugar would just spike through the roof, proportional to the amount I ate. So I wouldn't be consuming a lot of those. And I think most people at this stage in the health and science world would also generally align with that those aren't necessarily the best foods to consume. We would think, more of the less glycemic or less foods that have less of an impact on glucose levels, less of an impact on insulin levels. One thing I constantly hear, especially in the research and clinical community, is well, look, not everyone needs to be concerned about that because, people can respond to a lot of these foods just fine. I say, well, you're right, except that over half of America has prediabetes. And 90+% have some form of measurement that indicates that their metabolic health is impaired. And over 68% are obese. And now children are affected with these diseases, with obesity and prediabetes, at around 20%. So it's the fact that we are now less healthy than we've ever been.
We don't have the foundation to support.
Correct. And I think, when we think about healthy nutrition, we think about exercise. we describe them as medicine, but the reality is these are just normal aspects of things you should do every single day because that's what our bodies were made to do. And when we don't do those things, this is when health deteriorates. This is when we're challenging our body to maintain normal health.
One of the surprising ones for me was dried fruits. And it said, while fruit contains natural sugars, the process of drying it concentrates those sugars. This removes the water and can make the sugar more readily available for absorption, leading to a higher glucose spike compared to fresh fruit. Typically, people think of dried fruit as being a health food as well.
Yeah, I don't touch those because unless I don't have any glucose on me and my blood sugar is going down for some reason and it's in dangerously low levels, that's when I consume those foods. Otherwise, I would not consume them just because of how quickly they raise blood sugar levels.
Do you think everybody should try the ketogenic diet?
Ooh, that is a good question. I think, wow. What I would say is that you will never know the potential of its benefit or lack thereof if you don't try. Like anything in life, we're left to assume what everyone else is like. We've talked about the ketogenic diet numerous times here. We talked about exogenous ketones numerous times here. But if you don't try it, you don't know how it'll work for you. In science, Stephen, one of the most important things to appreciate is that we often publish bar graphs, look like this, a line that illustrates the average outcome of a group of people. But what you don't appreciate is that line or that bar graph is made up of numerous individuals who all average to that number. But what if you're the person who's at the very high dot or the very bottom dot, meaning that you're what they call an outlier or someone who responded negatively or positively to that. And then you just follow the average advice that study showed. Well, oh, look, I tried this approach and it didn't work for me. I'm just going to keep trying because this study said that I should. Well, no, you might be the person who was in that study who didn't respond, just like the person on the opposite end of the spectrum who averaged out to the middle.
So in that study that talked about the impact of exogenous ketones on brain stability, someone might have had 100% improvement in brain stability and someone might have had 20% improvement or whatever, and they've averaged it out across a bigger group of people. So if you are that person that had a 100% gain in brain stability, it's a pretty unbelievable tool for you to understand based on your body.
Exactly. And that's always the case in science. I mean, sometimes we look at this as responders and non-responders, but actually in the study where we gave the product from a treatment in Ketone IQ, in the SOCOM study, we actually saw that nearly all of them saw an increase in SpO2, nearly all of them saw an increase in heart rate, but that's rare. That is rare.
SpO2.
So the amount of oxygen in the blood. Okay. So the measure that would indicate whether someone in these low oxygen environments had more blood or less, more oxygen or less oxygen. Ultimately, it's important to try. I think I would always say, yes, you should try or any nutrition strategy, because you should try different ones. I've probably tried over 10 plus different diets. I mean, honestly, maybe like 15 or 20 at this point in my life. I've just come to find that the ketogenic diet, for all the reasons we described, and because I have type 1 diabetes and I have type 1 diabetes but had obesity, find that a ketogenic diet is remarkably powerful at helping me live a dramatically improved quality of life, not have the increased risk for the high and variable glucose levels, high insulin levels that lead to a near guarantee of complications and 10 to 20 years of lost life expectancy. That's why I do it.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.